Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox 338 over on the East Coast and 1238 on the West Coast. We are following new details about the indictment of former President Trump and 18 of his allies in Georgia over their alleged efforts to overturn his 2020 election loss in the state. The Fulton County District Attorney has proposed a possible trial date of March 4th of next year. That, by the way, one day before Super Tuesday. The indictment, which was nearly 100 pages, details dozens of alleged acts by Trump and his allies to undo his defeat. Now, that includes the infamous phone call with Georgia's Secretary of State asking him to find the votes necessary to win the state. I do want to bring in Scott Tenley, a criminal defense attorney and former federal prosecutor, to talk all about this. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Of course. So first off, talking about this possible trial date of March 4th of next year, is that realistic at this point?
It's not, for a variety of reasons. I think of it as essentially an opening bid. It's the district attorney communicating to the defendants, hey, this trial is moving fast. There's not going to be a lot of delay. You can't hide behind the complexity of the charges or the number of defendants to get out of this case. And what that does is encourage individuals to plead guilty, which shrinks the number of defendants. It's also going to encourage people to cooperate quickly before the train leaves the station, as we say. So really, that's what it is. Is it realistic that a 19-defendant trial could begin within 6 months? No way. Is it even realistic to think that all 19 defendants could go to trial at one time? Of course not. But it is an important message that the district attorney is sending to further her interest in how this case is going to unfold.
And how do you go about picking a jury for a case like this? I imagine it's a little tougher, not just because of the number of defendants, but also we're talking about the former president of the U.S., Donald Trump.
That's going to be a challenge, not just in Georgia, but of course everywhere. We do have a little bit of a data point. Right now in Fulton County, there is a RICO trial going on involving a gang, but members of the gang, kind of that is the RICO enterprise, are well-known entertainers. Jury selection has been proceeding for 8 months, and to date, they haven't selected a single juror that can sit on that jury. So, hopefully the jury in this case for President Trump won't take that long. But if it's taking that long in a case that's nowhere near the import and notoriety of President Trump in the January 6th case, we can assume it's going to be incredibly difficult.
And I want to get your thoughts on this, because Mark Meadows has said that he wants the case moved over to federal court. What are your thoughts on that, and what are the odds that it actually happens?
So it's really interesting. Mark Meadows and his legal team had this motion ready to go. It was filed, within hours of the indictment. Now, President Trump tried this in New York. He said, I was acting under color of federal law in connection with the charges in New York, and therefore they should be heard in federal court. That motion was rejected, and the logic being, well, you were not acting in the scope of your federal duties when you were allegedly paying hush money to cover up an affair and, lying about your books and records. Meadows has a much more credible argument, and that's because he was acting in his capacity as chief of staff, according to his papers. And that is, he's working for the president, he's serving the president's needs. So I think he has a stronger chance. But why I think he will ultimately not prevail is because the activities that he was doing were all related to the election. He was contacting state legislators in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, about the vote counts. And in the federal government, there is a very explicit and express line between official activities and campaign activities. And all of the allegations seem to center around what Mr. Meadows did in connection with the election and campaign activities. And I think that's where he's going to run into trouble.
And we're talking about an indictment that was almost 100 pages long. What stood out to you the most about that indictment?
Well, what's interesting is the tremendous breadth and depth of the charges. Certainly, there's a lot of overlap with the January 6th federal indictment, but it's clear that the special counsel there prepared that indictment to be narrow, to be for speed, to get that to trial before the election. And that is kind of likely to happen at this point. But what the district attorney did in Georgia was really look at all of the conduct, not just in Georgia, but everywhere, including the president's tweets, things that happened in other states, things involving the vice president. And really, it's telling a tremendously bigger story that's more all-encompassing. Now, that makes it much more unwieldy to prove at trial. That's going to make it more difficult for jurors to follow. But certainly, there's going to be a wealth of evidence that the district attorney will be able to draw from because those charges were so broad.
And everyone seemingly has a different opinion on this one, but of course I want to ask for yours here, just based on your legal experience. Which of these cases is of the most importance when you're talking about the four now cases against former President Trump? A lot of folks have said this one is kind of, the top one that's most important. What are your thoughts?
I would probably disagree with that. I think which case presents the most jeopardy to President Trump, I think, is the documents case, because that case, the evidence is pretty clear. He had documents he wasn't supposed to have. He tried to cover up the fact that he had those documents. There's text messages, there's video recordings, and there's cooperating witness testimony. That's a very difficult case to make out. Now, he does have the benefit of a judge who appears to be welcome to his arguments about delay and critical of the government. So that might not be the first to go to trial. But I do think the one that he has the most jeopardy for is the one that will probably go to trial first. And that's the January 6th case, just because it probably will go to trial first. That's when the rubber is going to meet the road with the various defenses that President Trump is raising. And to the extent that the Georgia case doesn't go to trial for a year or two, so much can happen between now and then. That may never even see a courtroom. That might be resolved by that point, depending on what happens in the earlier cases.
And the Fulton County Sheriff has said that we're actually going to see Trump turn himself in at the jail there, and then a booking photo will be taken, which it seems is a bit different than what we have experienced with these previous cases, right?
Yeah, that's right. In the other cases, Mr. Trump has surrendered himself. There seem to have been abnormal kind of precautions taken because of his status as the president with Secret Service protection. For example, in New York, he surrendered right to the courthouse itself. He did walked through a hallway to get to court. He wasn't mugshotted or booked like might be the standard practice. I have a kind of a dual mind on this. On one hand, I do appreciate that the president is being treated, and all of the people indicted in Georgia are being treated like every other defendant. That's a fundamental principle of our justice system, that no matter your race, your religion, your socioeconomic status, or your position, we should all be treated equally under the law. I think where I have a little bit of uncomfortability with what's been going on is that it does seem like the sheriff is creating news about this. He's publicizing it. He's talking about it in a way that is, I think, undermining the legitimacy and the normalcy of the process. If I were advising the sheriff, I would say, your comment should be, we're going to follow procedures, period. I have nothing further to say, because you don't want to give the appearance that this prosecution is out to get anyone in particular, including the former president.
How do you go about coordinating 4 different trials in 4 different criminal cases? Is there anything that is done to make that actually happen? Do they work together, the different agencies that are involved in these 4 different cases?
Well, that is going to be interesting to see, as this is, uncharted territory, like much of the indictments of the former president. Certainly there will be some interrelatedness, because as they set trial dates, you always have to take into consideration the conflicts of the defendant with other matters, the conflicts of his counsel. Clearly, he needs to have time, the president and his team, to review all the evidence and be prepared. But I do think we will see the various prosecuting authorities take efforts to keep the evidence and the strategy separate, because no matter what happens, they are going to be attacked by President Trump and his legal team as coordinating to just be out to get the president. So I do anticipate the special counsel and the 2 district attorneys' office will try to be scrupulous in how they silo their investigations and prosecutions. But I do think we'll see some deference to the federal prosecutions as far as scheduling goes.
All right, Scott Tenley, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. Is there anything else you want to add before I let you go?
I appreciate being here, Josh. Thanks for having me. I think as an attorney, this is a fascinating development to watch. As a former federal prosecutor, some of my former colleagues who I know from the Department of Justice and actually from law school are on the special counsel's team, and I think they're all in for a long and tenuous battle as these cases move to trial, and it's going to be quite exciting to see how everything shakes out.
All right. Thank you again for taking the time to help break all this down for us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, and I do want to go over just some of the basics right now if you are just joining us here, because we are following these new details about the indictment of the former president and 18 of his allies in Georgia over the alleged efforts to overturn his 2020 election loss in the state. The Fulton County DA proposing a possible trial date of March 4th, 2024, which, by the way, is one day before Super Tuesday. The indictment, which was nearly 100 pages, details dozens of alleged acts by Trump and his allies to undo his defeat. That includes that infamous phone call with Georgia's Secretary of State asking him to find the votes necessary to win the state. Other defendants in the case, notably, include former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani. We will follow all of this as it plays out and bring you the latest right here on Live Now from Fox. Let's head to a quick 2-minute commercial break, and on the other side, we'll get right back into your headlines, top stories, and live events. You're watching Live Now from Fox.